Good afternoon, pilot teachers, and good afternoon, students. Okay, thank you. Sit down. We are going to actually start on the next factor, which contributes also to what makes climate different. And today we are going to move on to looking at precipitation. But before we start on this new topic on precipitation, I'd like us to recap on the last lot of information we looked at. And if you can make reference now, especially to your exercise book on what we have covered in our last lesson. And the last lesson we looked at pollutants in the atmosphere and how pollution can also contribute to variation in temperatures. We concentrated mainly on looking at the greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere and how carbon dioxide can contribute to the warming up of the atmosphere. Looking at the table now on the monitor, that table basically contains some of the main greenhouse gases and the source of those different greenhouse gases. This is revision. This is what we have covered. So let's look at that quickly. We start off with the carbon dioxide gas, which is mainly from burning of fossil fuels in power stations, petrol engines, and factories. Also note that burning forest accounts for about 10% of the carbon dioxide added to our atmosphere. Another of the gas, the ozone gas, which is mainly in the lower atmosphere, formed by chemical reaction between car exhaust emissions and sunlight. We also have methane, mainly from animal waste, rice paddies, gas and coal rubbish or fields, rubbish dumps, and wetlands, as well as swamps. Nitrous oxide, mainly from car exhaust and nitrate fertilizers, and CFCs, or the chlorofluorocarbons, mainly from aerosol propellants, refrigerator, fluids, air conditioners, and foam packaging. Basically, those are some of the greenhouse gases. We looked at how the greenhouse effect has contributed to the warming up of our atmosphere. And your homework, you were supposed to complete a diagram, and that diagram should clearly explain how carbon dioxide does have an impact on the rise in temperatures. We had a diagram on our monitor also to help us understand, especially on what happens to solar radiation coming through. So if we look at the information from the monitor, we note here that naturally in our environment, there is also and already available levels of carbon dioxide. The sun heats up the surface. Trees, plants, etc., or rainforests, they use large amounts of the carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. Then whatever is actually left gets, or the heat that is from the sun, also gets to be radiated back into space. And because there is low level of carbon dioxide, not all of that heat is actually kept or trapped within. The heat is actually balanced as it passes back out into outer space. Today, with the increased usage of maybe vehicles, also factories and industries, most of those now are actually contributing a lot more pollutants into the atmosphere. As well as that, the destroying of rainforest or trees, mainly for different purposes, are also contributing then to a large amount of carbon dioxide kept within our atmosphere. So the increasing levels of carbon dioxide, which will mean now that the heat coming through, instead of coming through and then escaping to maintain that balance, what is happening now is the heat is being trapped by the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and then that heat is used to raising the temperatures. So what is happening today? The Earth is actually generally becoming warmer because of the high levels of carbon dioxide. So your homework, you were supposed to construct a diagram, and then from that diagram, you're supposed to be able to explain the relationship between carbon dioxide and temperatures. Any queries or questions then with regard to that information? No questions? Okay, then we'll move on if there are no questions. Oh, Gibbs, do you have a question? Okay, there's a question at the end there, so let's pass the mic down quickly.
My question is, when the sun rays is entering the atmosphere, the heat doesn't come out because of the blockage of the ozone layer. And when the sun rays is entering, can it block the sun rays to come in or no?
The ozone layer?
Yeah.
Okay, we're looking at the ozone layer. The ozone layer definitely, it absorbs. It absorbs some percentage of the solar radiation which is coming through. And whatever comes through will have already gone through the process of being absorbed in the ozone layer. Imagine if there was no ozone layer, then what will happen is that most of the radiation from the sun, which is supposed to be reflected and scattered and absorbed, will come right through. But the ozone layer, it acts like a blanket. And because it acts like a blanket and it absorbs the ultraviolet radiation, it allows only a small percentage which is useful to the living things to actually penetrate and come through. So if you're looking at the ozone layer will not be contributing to actually blocking the radiation that is going back through. The ozone layer will not be responsible for that, but the carbon dioxide levels in our atmosphere will be responsible then for not allowing most of that heat which has already heated the surface as insolation and is passing back out to escape into space. Rather, it will be actually trapped in by the carbon dioxide. For the ozone layer, it is looking at the absorbing of the ultraviolet radiation coming through. So instead of all of it coming through, some of it only is coming through, and that some which is coming through is contributing to the heating up of the surface. And from what has heated up the surface and is escaping will then be trapped by the carbon dioxide, not the ozone layer. Is that clear? Another question here. Microphone.
I actually have two questions to ask. Firstly, if carbon dioxide can prevent the heat from escaping, why can't it prevent heat from entering? And secondly, we know the effect of carbon dioxide or the functions ozone layer and fluorocarbons. Okay. Methane and nitrous oxide are also classified as greenhouse gases. What effect does or do they have on the atmosphere temperature?
Okay, we'll maybe answer the first question. The first one, can carbon dioxide prevent the amount of heat that is actually penetrating through and coming? It can prevent, but we are looking at whatever is already coming through once it actually heats up the surface. Remember, there's already heat on the surface, right, from insolation. So whatever that is coming through, which is used to heating up the surface, is usually maintained by the long wave radiation. Short wave radiations will heat up the surface, but then there must always be a balance maintained, and the long wave radiation will allow then for equal and suitable heating to maintain within our atmosphere. The trapping of the carbon dioxide gases the trapping of the heat is as a result mainly of the buildup of the carbon dioxide gases within our atmosphere, which then does not allow, because it is trapping. Whatever comes through will penetrate definitely, but for it to release, once it has been used up here, the amount that is going back is in long wave radiation form, and the amount will not be as strong as what is actually coming through. So once it is going back, it might not be allowed to escape because of the high levels of carbon dioxide, which then prevents the escaping of that heat back. The second question, methane gases and nitrous oxides. They are considered as greenhouse gases because they, together with the CFCs, the ozone and carbon dioxide, are what builds up to form the greenhouse gases. In small percentage and in small amounts, we collect, or they come together, make a one whole layer, and then they are all out there. But if we have to maybe take a sample, break it up, then from that sample, you are able to say, okay, which ones are CO2, which ones are the ozone gases, which ones are methane, which ones are nitrous oxides. But they all put together, they build up that layer of carbon dioxide that we have around. And that's the reason why when we looked at the greenhouse gases, I did mention also that we are looking at how pollutants in our atmosphere can contribute to variation in temperatures. And we specifically looked at the main gas in the greenhouse effect, which is carbon dioxide. But that is not the only gas that is responsible for the greenhouse effect. The other gases are also those of methane, nitrous oxides, ozone gases, and etc. Okay? One more question?
Does the greenhouse gases have any effect on the ozone layer?
Definitely, yes. The greenhouse effect. The greenhouse gases, do they have an impact on the ozone layer? Yes. Remember, some of the greenhouse gases are ozone gases. CFCs, or the chlorofluorocarbons, are also part of the greenhouse gases. And the gas which is responsible, or the pollutant which are responsible for breaking up the ozone layer, are the CFCs. And that's why, definitely, yes, the greenhouse gases can also be responsible or are responsible for the breaking up of the ozone layer, especially the CFCs. We're looking at the chlorofluorocarbons. Okay, and we have the last question, and then we'll move on. Yes, okay? Last question here from Val.
My question is to do with the ozone layer. When people refer to the ozone layer, they say there's a hole in there. Is there a term used just to refer to global warming, or is there really a hole there? And what are the contributing factors to that hole?
Okay, when we are looking at, we are now coming to looking at environmental issues. So when we are studying about the rise in temperature and pollutants in the atmosphere definitely having an impact on an increase in temperature, maybe global issues need to be also looked at. And two environmental global issues that are greatly or widely discussed are those of the greenhouse effect, that is the rise in temperature, and as a result of the rise in temperature, sea levels are rising, the melting of the snow and ice in the north and the south poles, the low-lying islands are drowning, and etc. That is an issue, a global problem issue. And the second one is the depletion of the ozone layer. In other words, the growing concern about a hole which is growing in this layer, which is the ozone. So both of those are issues to do with the environment, but which is affecting the whole world because it's a global problem or issue. We are looking at definitely the increase in the amount of carbon dioxide and the pollutants in our atmosphere is definitely having an impact on the rise in temperature, the greenhouse effect, and also the growing hole in the ozone layer. The ozone layer is a layer that we have studied about already in our work on the different layers of the atmosphere. In which layer is it found in? In the second layer of the atmosphere, which is the stratosphere. And the ozone layer is made up of the ozone gases. And those ozone gases, they serve a purpose of absorbing the ultraviolet radiation from the sun. So not all of that poisonous radiation actually comes through. Rather, it gets to be absorbed. With the increasing amount of carbon dioxide that is being put into the atmosphere, of which some of those greenhouse gases are CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons, they are contributing also to the breaking up of the ozone layer. And that's where we have the growing concern about the holes, especially in the ozone layer over the Antarctic and the Arctic areas. Okay, if there are no other questions, then we'll move on then. Today, we are going to look at the second of those factors which contributes to what makes climate different. Remember the first factor? The first factor is temperature. And what we have been covering on temperature so far is we have looked at what are some of the factors also that makes temperatures different from one place to another. So temperature is an important factor in determining the type of climate a particular region would have. The second important factor is that of precipitation. Precipitation is an important factor that also would contribute and also have an impact on what type of climate a region would have. What would be the third factor? Beside temperature and precipitation, there is also pressure, yes, and we will look at pressure later on, but for today we are going to move on to looking at the work on precipitation. If we look at the information from our monitor, when we think about precipitation, what would be another term that you're thinking of beside precipitation? Yeah, rain. Rainfall. In the tropical areas like in Papua New Guinea, we experience precipitation in the form of rainfall. But if we're looking at a definition to what precipitation is, it is not only water which is coming out of the sky. It can be any form of moisture which comes out of the sky. That is precipitation. But for precipitation to actually occur, there is a very important cycle that we need to look at, of which from that cycle, one of the processes is that of precipitation. And that cycle is the water cycle. The water cycle is simply the process which enables the continuous movement of water. And when we look at the continuous movement of water, the water itself has to go through different stages before precipitation can actually occur. So our task now is we are going to look at a simple diagram or illustration of the different processes of the water cycle, and then you will be required to construct a diagram showing the different processes in your exercise book. After we do that activity, then I am going to put you into groups, and the groups will be given one of the process involved in the water cycle, and then each of you or the groups then will be asked to present, giving an explanation of those different processes, as well as illustrating the presentation with diagrams and pictures and etc. We'll come to that shortly. Okay, the water cycle, a very important process which enables the continuous movement of water. In order for the water cycle to operate, it has to have energy. Where is that energy obtained from to operate the water cycle? The sun, yes. So therefore, the sun is the main source which provides the energy that operates the processes in the water cycle. Okay, sun, the main source that provides energy, and from that energy, it allows the water cycle to operate. The water cycle can also be referred to as the hydrologic cycle. Hydro meaning water. Okay, let's maybe look at that simple diagram on our monitor there to illustrate the different processes which are involved in the water cycle. There are many different ways in which you can come up with your diagrams to show the water cycle. So when it comes to you constructing, I will want you to be a little bit more creative and see if you can construct a nice diagram, but include on your diagram all those different processes that are involved. Okay, we have the sun, very important, the source of energy to operate the water cycle. The sun heats up the surface, and then from the surface we have water, the trees, plants, animals, etc. What then happens once the sun heats up those different surfaces? Evaporation takes place. Okay, note also that evaporation does not only take place from the sea or the water, it can also take place from the land and the plants and the animals. The different surfaces that evaporation takes place from are called albedos. So when we talk about albedo are referring to the different surfaces whereby evaporation actually takes place from. Evaporation takes place from the water, it takes place from the land, plants or vegetation, animals, etc. When we look at the evaporating of water from different sources and put them all together, the term evapotranspiration will be used then to describing that. So instead of saying evaporation from the water, evaporation from the land, evaporation from vegetation, we use only one word to describing evaporation from all different sources, and that is evapotranspiration. So the energy from the sun heats up the surface, evapotranspiration takes place, the air rises and then it cools. The next stage then becomes condensation. And in condensation, we are able to see it. It can be visible. And an example that makes it visible for us to see that condensation is taking place or has taken place would be the clouds, yes. Okay, condensation takes place. We don't have clouds sitting up there and sitting out there forever. Once they get a bit too heavy, then what happens to it? What happens? Precipitation takes place. So precipitation is the process that we are looking at now. And this is what happens after, or we start off from the sun's energy hitting the surface, evapotranspiration, condensation, precipitation. Okay, from precipitation, note, water would fall on the surface. Any water that runs on the surface are referred to as surface runoff. Good. Do we only have surface runoffs once evaporation has taken place? No. Some of the water gets to seep or percolate to the underground sources. Okay, any seeping of water through to the underground sources are referred to as infiltration or percolation. So the infiltration and percolation takes place. Under the surface, water which is stored there does not have to always remain there. What can happen to it is that it can flow back out to the sea. And then from the sea, evaporation takes place again and the cycle continues. So within this cycle here, we have looked at one of those processes, and one of those processes is that of precipitation. You will be required to construct a diagram showing all those processes very shortly. But before we do that, let's do this activity orally. I have a diagram here, and you will note that there are arrows with the letters A to F. Okay, A to F. We have numbers 1 to 6. What we are going to do now is we are going to look at the letter, which letter would go with the numbers and the phrase or the process that are given. Okay, number one tells us the sun's heat turns water to vapor. Number 2, clouds carry the water vapor sideways. Number 3, rain and snowfall from the clouds. Number 4, water runs off the surface of the land. Number 5, water sinks into the soil. Number 6, plants absorb water from the soil and release it into the air. Okay, having those numbers, we are now going to simply put the correct letter with the numbers so that we can see the whole cycle in the water cycle diagram. Okay, look at the different letters that are given there. We have A is here, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, from here, that's A, and A. Okay, let's look at B. B is from here. C is this arrow here. D here. E, the arrow here, going back from here up. And F is this point here, from here and down this way. Okay, number 1. Which letter do you think will go with number 1? Okay, we'll have someone to give us the answer. We start from the second row. Okay, so let's see. The sun's heat turns water to vapor. What letter would best go with number 1?
B.
B. Okay, we agree with him that it would have to be this one here, B. Okay. Number 2, clouds carry the water vapor sideways. Shelley.
C.
Okay, definitely it will have to be C because the movement here shown by the arrow should help us with that. Rain and snowfall from the clouds. Kiran?
E.
Okay, it will have to be A, yes. 1, 2, and 3. All of those arrows labeled A. Okay, water runs off the surface of the land. Catherine?
F.
Okay, good. It will have to be F. This arrow here and that one there. Water sinks into the soil. Francis?
D.
D. Double check. We're all happy with D. Yes, definitely is correct. And that leaves the last one finally. Plants absorb water from the soil and release it into the air.
E.
E is correct. And that is aided also with the arrowhead pointing upwards. Simple exercise, simply showing us the water cycle. Okay, now it's your turn. I'd like you, into your exercise book, to construct a water cycle diagram and make sure that you clearly label and show the different processes, perhaps by using arrows and also numbers, so that the arrows or the numbers or letters will indicate the sequence and the correct process that are actually happening in the water cycle diagram. I'll give you 5 minutes, and then after that, I'm going to go through explaining the activity that I'd like us to do for our presentation in our next lesson. Okay, some of you might be wondering where you might be able to get some help for the construction. If you look at your booklet, the front cover of your booklet contains a simple and a sample of the water cycle. As well as that, from other sources, perhaps if you have some diagrams that you can use to help you with the construction, you go ahead and use those diagrams. Oh, you've got the diagram there? No problem. It's a good one. Put it into your book. Got the work done.
No, I was just thinking that, you know,
Had a diagram on the board.
not the diagram, the one before the diagram, the explanation, the sun is like main source of energy.
Maybe I'll get to put it up a little bit later after we finish, then you can make note of it. Let me work on the groups. Processes are 1. 5. Yes. Oh, yeah, definitely. Now we come back to what we've done on limestone regions, and that's where stalactites, stalagmites, yes. Resurgence, the emergence of that underground water. Underground water. What else? So we have 34 students altogether. Okay, 34 divided by 7. What's 34 divided by 7? 7, 7, 7, 5, 30, 35. 1. No, 7 5s. 7 4s are 28. Okay, 7 groups of 4. 6 groups of 4, and 1 group will have 5 people. Okay, I'm going to give you your activity now that you're going to work on, and also have it ready for our presentation in the next lesson. Okay, from the construction of the water cycle, you might have seen now that, yes, there are different processes which are actually involved in the water cycle. We start off with evaporation to condensation, precipitation, surface runoff, underground flow, infiltration or percolation, and etc. Okay, here goes. The first group here, they're going to work on evaporation. Okay, that's the first group. The second group, condensation. The third group, precipitation. Group 4, you're going to look at infiltration. Group 5, at the back there, we're looking at surface runoff. Group 6, we're looking at underground water. And group 7, Anita, that's going to be your group with the left or rest of the students on that side. You're going to do transpiration. Okay, look at the instruction on what you are expected to do so that we have a good explanation of those processes next week. You have been given a process to work on in the water cycle. Your task now is to ensure that you explain well to the class what that process involves. And beside that, you need to illustrate or show that process by using diagrams, pictures, and etc. to help with a better understanding of those different processes. You do the work as a group, and then you also decide who is going to actually talk on what aspect of that particular process. Okay, and with that activity, that will also bring us to the end of our lesson. Don't forget, I'd like you to ensure you complete your diagram on the water cycle as well. Okay, class, if you can stand up now. To the pilot teachers, our keyword for lesson 110 is water cycle. Good afternoon and thank you, students.